Hello everyone, my name is Sudhir and I'm the host for today. I'm from the IC3 team, and with me I have Divya, who's the co-host as of now. And today we have three speakers, the main Dr. Kevin House, Miss Teresa Forbes, and Mr. Christopher Coburn. And so to give you a brief idea about Dr. Kevin House, he's FCCT Education Futures Architect, Education in Motion, and Associate Professor in Practice from Durham University. So we'll have a 30-minute time slot wherein he's going to talk about the topic, which is joining the dots, online and hybrid high school models, and the future of pre-tertiary learning. So over to you, Dr. Kevin. All the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And welcome everybody. And thanks for taking time in your busy lives to join us. I hope you'll find the next 30 minutes of chat from us engaging, and then we'll have some time in the last 10 or 15 minutes for some questions. So what I would ask you to do, if you've got questions, as we discuss certain topics, could you put them into the chat? And then also, I can either read those out or we can identify you at the end and you can come up on screen and ask the question yourself. So before we get stuck into the questions that we wanted to explore with you, I'd like to introduce my two guests. As mentioned, Teresa Forbes, Founding Director of Shaping Learning, and Chris Colbert, who is an advisor for a really exciting new hybrid first, online first hybrid school that I hope you're going to really enjoy hearing more about. So Teresa, do you want to just tell everyone a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Hello, everybody. I'm Teresa Forbes, Director of Shaping Learning. I'm also advisor to Amala Education, a high school refugee diploma. And my background is I'm a teacher. I've worked internationally. I live in Oman. And I've worked for 2 or 3 curriculum organisations, including the International Baccalaureate and the government in the UK on the national curriculum.
Thank you very much. Chris.
Good day, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My relevant background is I ran the Harvard Innovation Lab for several years up until 2019. And while there, came to realize that much of innovation fails, and that's statistically proven. And the reason why it fails is because of a lack of human understanding. Also, while there, I began exploring the world of education and scratching at why was it not more effective than I think it should be. I really do believe that the future of humanity is predicated on us doing a better job with what I call the human development system. And out of that examination determined that there's a lack of intentionality and even a lack of dimensionality to how much of the traditional system approaches the task. And so I began looking for opportunities to help the education sector and ended up very serendipitously meeting the School of Humanity and Raya Bidshari, who's the founder. And since spring have been working directly with her and her team on scaling what I believe is the model of the future for high schools.
Thank you very much. And just a bit of background about myself. Obviously, you heard I work for Education in Motion. I've been in international education for over 30 years, worked in Botswana in Africa, in Thailand, in Spain, China, and then finally in Singapore. So I went through from classroom to school leadership. Then I also worked alongside Teresa. A bit after Teresa's time, I was also at the International Baccalaureate here in Asia Pacific, doing work with school services and then in what became in IB World Schools before joining Education in Motion, where I helped establish an institute for learning and research, and then moved to work on a project that I'll tell probably a little bit more about, which was SE21, in a similar vein to projects that we're going to share with you, both one that Teresa's been working closely with and the one that Chris just mentioned. These are models of high school education that are really, I think, intentionally trying to disrupt the landscape, to create more diversity, to create more opportunities for equity, and create more opportunities for access. So I think what I'd kick off by doing is just to ask Teresa a question, and then we'll probably riff off that, of her response, and then go into a question following up with Chris. So Teresa, tell us a little bit more about the program that you've been working with Amala Education, and to what extent is it online or is it hybrid, and what's the rationale behind some of the decision making there?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So Amala Education is a UK-based charity founded by Polly and Mia, who are two inspirational women who have really taken hold of this whole notion of a new diploma specifically designed for displaced people from refugee backgrounds. There is no other real global refugee program out there. And our thinking behind designing such a program is actually a hybrid program, but actually in person first. And I'll explain that a little bit more because in our situation and in a displaced situation for refugees, the physical environment and the social contact of students is incredibly important. And the students that come to our schools and our hubs in Jordan and in Greece and in Kenya are seeking that cohesion, that social cohesion in a physical environment. Apart from that, we then run most of the modules are accessible online, and we see the importance of the online environment, but we also have to ensure that where our operations are, online is accessible through either mobile technology or through provisions that we can make for the refugees that come to our centres. Our project, our diploma is free for all students. We don't charge anything. It's a charity. It's based on donations. And our rationale for such a project is to bring students together through their own lived experiences, which will be very similar, yet very different. And our programme is based on a new concept. Rather than seeing traditional subjects, you'll see relevant strands that are very pertinent to the lived experiences of refugees, such as you'll see social innovation, leadership for change, peace building, community building, self-expression. All of those aspects of a diploma are as important as the disciplinary subjects that you may see in a traditional high school. I'll stop there and hand back to you, Kevin.
Thanks. You made me think about something there that I've pondered over recently, and I wonder what your ideas were, either yourself, Teresa, or Chris. That I wonder if we're now in a century where the emphasis has moved or stacked, perhaps. In the 20th century, I think a lot of the disparities you found globally were often based around economics. That hasn't necessarily gone away, but I think there's an added area now where in the 21st century, the access agenda and equity would be closely aligned with bandwidth and access to bandwidth. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder what people thought about that.
I mean, this is like a trite way to respond to that, but I think in today's world, everything is about access. I think the failure of systems, not just education, finance, healthcare, everything is how do we create universal, unilateral access? And yes, with technology now at the center of every system, bandwidth becomes as important as any other thing. And I can go on a rant about globalization and how we have to operate globally. And I think the bandwidth issue is a global issue. It's not a country by country issue. Like the world would benefit if 100% of the world was connected, and children obviously would benefit if 100% of them were connected. Whether we can fashion the governance system required to deliver that outcome is the complicated question.
For sure. And I wonder if with the evolution of things like SDGs, for whatever criticisms people might have of them, I wonder whether that access to bandwidth might actually become an SDG in and of itself in the future.
Yeah. So,
Chris, I wondered if you might share with people the notion. I mean, I've heard it said that online's often labelled as either a scalable savior or as fundamentally ineffective. I was reading something today by Andy Hargreaves, which was kind of along those lines. And how does the School of Humanity program deliver effective online learning?
It's a great question. Well, first, let me do what Teresa did, which is explain School of Humanity a little bit more.
Yeah.
So we describe ourselves as an online first high school. What that really means is that we offer actually 3 different programs: a 4-year high school program that we're working towards launching in September 2022, a 6-month after school program, and a 6-week summer school program. And we began in this past summer with a summer school cohort. There's an two after school cohorts happening right now, and all of the programs, or at least the after school and the 4-year high school, will be offered both as online only as well as hybrid. So the 4-year program, particularly, the emphasis is on hybrid, in part because we believe what Teresa and the Amala team believe, which is, that in-person matters. Now, that doesn't mean that online is ineffective. What the purpose of online only as an alternative for the School of Humanity is back to what we were just talking about: access. If you're a curious student living in rural Brazil, the likelihood of us being able to get to you vis-a-vis with a hybrid option, at least in the next 5 years, is not great. But we can get to you with an online only option. So then the question becomes, well, how do you ensure that the online only platform is, dare I say, as effective as the hybrid model? And this first statement goes back to my time at Harvard, when Harvard first really started investing in online options for both Harvard Business School and the other 11 schools. Kind of interestingly, they're the way I think, and I think this is the way a lot of schools have thought about online, is, well, okay, what happens in the classroom? What happens in the classroom is the student is sitting in a chair looking at the teacher, and the teacher is talking to the student and drawing things on a whiteboard. So therefore, online should just replicate that. You're like, no, that's not what should be happening in the classroom, right? The sort of lecture only modality of students, dutifully listening to whomever talk about whatever, that's not, but be that as it may, when you move to online, all of a sudden you have new ways of connecting. It's not a lesser than, it's actually a different than. And the ways of connecting begin with personalization. All of a sudden, the interface can be personalized to where you are, how you are, where you're strong, where you're weak, where you need extra help. That's hard to do in a classroom of 30 or 50 or 300 students, maybe even impossible. So I think the online modality cranks up the capacity to personalize, which I don't know anybody that would reject that as a positive outcome. It cranks up the capacity for tracking, for understanding where the student is. I've taught at Harvard, not as an academic, as a head of an innovation lab. I had no idea at any point in time where any of the students were in terms of tracking with me, in terms of understanding what I was trying to impart to them, in terms of how well they were doing in the breakout groups. So I think tracking is a big one. And the third thing I'd say, which is kind of maybe even ironic, I had this conversation with somebody recently, this presumption that online is not as effective as social interaction, right? That Kevin and Teresa, if you and I are in a classroom and we're sitting together, or we break out on a project, work table, and we build relationships, and then we leave class together and we're talking in the hallway, and we go to the cafeteria together, and that's how friendships are fostered. I think what's actually, if you really examine the traditional, call it, world of education, or even of living, I think there's some flaws in the physical system. I mean, you guys ever heard of cliques? You ever heard, and so the beauty of online as a social interaction driver is it's an equalizer. It's much harder to create cliques online. And everybody, and particularly in the School of Humanity case, most of our students are all over the world. And so instead of students being sized up by what they're wearing and sized up by where they're sitting and, oh, he's friends with Judy or Jane, all of that goes away. Plus, we can insert social interaction devices like gaming. We have this thing called the spaceship where the students can go, go hang out in the spaceship, no adults allowed. There are all these technology enablers or enabled technologies that foster that social component that aren't necessarily available in the physical classroom. So, and there's a litany of other things. There's parent portals. There's a way to create interactivity that is maybe oddly more effective or differently effective. I know that's not probably
I think you're right. I think it's a difference. I know some research and anecdotal stuff that's been coming out through the pandemic has shown that students with, if you think about the range of learning diversities and the different ways in which students learn most effectively, interestingly, those students who maybe haven't found the face-to-face classroom environment as effective have often found the asynchronous and synchronous environments available to them during the pandemic has given them a very different perspective and made them become and feel more confident and effective as learners. Teresa, I wonder what your thoughts are.
I totally agree, and I think part of what I was going to sort of say next is that this time, this period, this era, which was pre-pandemic, I think, and then also during the pandemic, of the rise of the alternative schooling, is something that I think it was coming anyway. It was present anyway with the works and projects I was involved with, and I think that the alternatives, options that are out there now for students, for families that are looking for something different, where students may not have quite fitted into that large school environment, or found learning tedious because they wanted to accelerate at their own paces, or they wanted to record, play fast forwards, play back, and learn that at their own speed. All of those things are real benefits of the online and the pandemic, the upside of it. But I also think that there's a bigger thing here. There's a bigger thing emerging, and that's alternatives to traditional high school diplomas, and the straitjacketing of the small range of diplomas that are really available in the world in national and international systems. It's very, very narrow. And there is a monopoly on innovation, because innovation is so difficult when you have qualification and regulation systems. So I think, without going into sort of the next part of our conversation, I think that this opportunity is actually giving rise to a lot more creativity and more challenge, which will come through to the next sectors in higher education.
I think that's a great point, and it does kind of segue into something I wanted to ask you both in a moment. But for me, it really does ask questions. Well, the words that are often used now to the point of becoming aerosol words, in that they get sprayed around and maybe have lost some of their meaning, but entrepreneurialism and innovation. I mean, fundamentally, we're talking about aspects of creativity which really lend themselves to suggesting that what we might call an industrial designed curriculum is no longer covering the skills required for the future. And I wondered if I might ask you both, really, to what extent are the programs that you're engaged with at the moment considering and working through some of those areas around the future of work and future of work skills? Chris?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think I can sort of grossly simplify the whole thing down to the intentionality of traditional education, and maybe all traditional society has been mechanistic. And I think increasingly, because of the variability of the world, the pace of change, which is only going to accelerate, it has to become humanistic, where we give people, all people, the capacity to constantly and actively adapt forever. I've written about this, where in the old days, you went to school, you graduated, you got a job, and that was your career. And you did that till you were 55, and then you've retired. Done.
It's a linear process.
In the new days, I feel more pressure to adapt now in a good way. I don't think it's a bad thing than I did when I was 25. And so the humanistic skills and mindsets and behaviors that the entire education system needs to focus on are everything, because if we don't give them the skills, the mindsets, behaviors, then they're going to get out into the world. Or as we see today, the reskilling of labor. Here's my issue with that, which is many of the corporations that are focused on reskilling are looking at it mechanistically. Like, let's teach them new tricks so that they're still of value to the company. And I'm like, no, you need to teach them humanistically. Let's imbue in them adaptive capacities. Because whatever we teach them mechanistically 2 years from now will be obsolete. And we'll have to reskill them again.
Yeah.
So I don't know, Teresa, what's your
I'm in agreement. I think the Amala education, the high school diploma, has been built primarily on work-based skills, future skills, and the future of what opportunities, limited opportunities offer enough for refugees in places like where they are either in a camp or not in a camp. Their work futures are very limited. And most of the refugees that we're involved with often go back and work in their own communities that they're within. So they'll be community builders, they'll be peace builders, they will be entrepreneurial and trying to work out their own business possibilities. So we've based the whole diploma on what you may want to call the softer skills, although I find that term quite problematic. Critical thinking, problem solving, resourcefulness, self-navigated learning, leadership, all of those skills are the core of this program. And then the subject disciplines that might come later are the secondary part. So we've built the program leading from a lot of the work that OECD did on transformative competencies. So if you want young people to transform their lives or to transform the world, you've got to start with the foundation of the program. So the 3 transformational competencies that this diploma is built on are creating new value. So that's the adaptability. We don't know what they're going to create, but they're going to create things that are going to be useful and new. Taking responsibility for their own lives and their pathways, and managing complexity. So those are the 3 core competencies that drive the whole curriculum. And there's nothing there about whether it's a literacy, numeracy, science based, or aesthetic. It's all about those very, very useful, necessary competencies.
I love that.
And I think, I heard someone reference them as durable skills, and I know I think of them as dynamic. They're dynamic skills in that they continue to grow and evolve, and they vary, and you use them in different ways and with different levels of expertise in different contexts. And I think that's, if you look at the leadership industry, for example, that's fundamentally dealing with those dynamic skills and saying, okay, you might have them in this area, but you're perhaps needing growth and coaching in this area because they are dynamic and they are used in different contexts. And I wondered if we might turn, because I'm conscious of time, and I want to create some time for people to ask some questions. And please do use the chat function, guys. And then also, if we do clear some space for you to ask questions, if you could just use the raise your hand in one of the reactions that you've got at the bottom in the toolbar, that would be great. So what I wanted to turn to in the last few minutes was really just thinking about, we're talking about a more balanced approach to the high school experience. Obviously, that comes down to fundamentally what I've borrowed a term from you, Lord, or elsewhere about credential capital, because obviously at the end of high school, you get credential capital and you want to go out and you want to spend it, whether it's in tertiary or in the world of work. If we're bringing into an arena these dynamic or durable skills alongside the more traditional areas of academic knowledge and skills and nurturing a range of dispositions, what challenges do you think that creates for us when it comes to trying to forge conversations and understanding and creating more diversity in the bottleneck that is, say, university admissions?
That's a hell of a question.
I'll let you go first, Chris.
You go first, Teresa.
I could talk about this forever, because it's the bane of my life, really, in terms of a number of projects I'm involved with trying to create something new that is purposeful and life-worthy and different to what's out there already. But I think the optimistic view, let's give you the optimistic view first, is through the programs that I'm involved with, and Amala in particular. Whenever we have a conversation, we understand that university by university or college by college, we always get a very positive response. We always say, yes, we will take the students on these basis. We often get that very positive institution by institution. When you come to the collective or the national state or the public state university, it's a very different picture. So there is, in a real closed door. The difference, I think, between high schools that are open access to everybody and the Amala refugee program is there are a number of real incentives and programs that are specific to refugees. Places like Arizona State University, University of the People, UN and DAFI programs, all are offering scholarships or pathways that help our students move forward. But they are too few and far between, and often they're very, very restricted to certain types of refugee, which is a real surprise. You know, it may be that one program will back Syrian refugees, but not other refugees too. So there's real issues of access and in some ways discrimination, I think, around those pathways. So we're just keen to work with as many people as possible to work on that. It's very labour intensive, but we've also see the value in becoming accredited by other organisations. So Amala has just been accepted by CIS, Council of International Schools, as a member. So I think that's going to help their position and their outreach to those institutions. But we also have to keep the students' levels of belief and realism in place, because not all students will go to higher education or be able to, because even the smallest amount of money that they need to pay is extortionate. So we have to work on multiple pathways, and higher education not being the only one. So that's kind of where we sit on it. It's a really challenging space, but lots of positive wins. And I'm sure, Kevin, you can talk about some of the work from SE21 where we've had really positive indications as well.
Yeah, I mean, for me, before I hand over to Chris, because I want to get Chris's thoughts, having worked for a long time in the higher education sector. But from my perspective, I guess I'm putting my money on the micro credentialing landscape and the notion around digital wallets in the future, and how that might offer ways of, on the one hand, personalizing, even from school compulsory education, personalizing what kind of evidencing of learning students want to capture, and that being curated with, obviously, with advisors and coaches from faculty and elsewhere, industrial partners or whatever it may be, and then on through into the world of work and higher education, where already the landscape around micro-credentialing is reasonably well established in certain parts of the world. I think one of the bigger challenges, again, we're talking about access, is often if you collect a micro-credential, let's say in Sri Lanka, having a way of translating the value of that micro-credential if you want to go and work in the EU, for example. At the moment, the discrepancies we see around things like degree programs globally, I think micro-credentialing, if we could figure out a mechanism, and I'm on a working group with the ICOBC, International Committee for Badges and Credentials, where we're looking at really what kind of mechanisms could be created, and looking at things like finance, for example, where you've got SWIFT codes that work as an international translation to basically build trust into the transaction. So could you use a similar mechanism for credentialing to build trust into the credential transaction when you try and move to different parts of the world? But really, I mean, from your time in one of the world's most prestigious higher education institutions, Chris, what was your sense of where it was and where it is at the moment in terms of that landscape of accepting more diverse pre-tertiary student learning?
I'll start with a not pleasant story, and then I'll end with hope. There was a moment at my time there where somebody, a senior person involved with the business school, said to me, you know, Chris, personal development has nothing to do with professional development. And I politely disagreed and went on a rant about that. But my point being is, I think, you know, the entrenched are still entrenched. But the good news is, I'm seeing a movement. I'm seeing a movement in terms of organizations like Amala. I'm seeing like SC21 or EIM. I gave a talk in Singapore in 2018 at the Singapore FinTech Festival. I was a keynote, and I talked all about the importance of bringing more human understanding into technology for a variety of reasons. And I'm convinced in 2018, I was the only person in a 5-day conference that used the word humanity. And fast forward 4 years, and I think if you did a word cloud on the word, it would be the biggest word. That you're hearing and seeing more people understanding that we have to move from a mechanistic to a humanistic society and set of systems that underpin society. And you're seeing it. You are seeing it in bits and pieces in the education system and in higher education. I've been in conversation, you know, the London Interdisciplinary School. I mean, the whole thing is based on human understanding, both in terms of how the curriculum is being established, very similar to School of Humanity, but also in terms of the intentionality of the curriculum. The challenge, I think, for the practitioner is moving from a mechanistic, which is fundamentally binary approach to education, where the measure is a thing called a diploma, to a humanistic system, which is necessarily multivariate and complicated. Like the three things that Teresa talked about in terms of the outcome of the program, each one of those things is so complicated to teach to and to gauge and to measure, but they're the right things.
Yeah.
So we can't give up, you know, but I am hopeful. I really don't think the word movement is too extreme. I think there is a movement. I don't think we're alone in the desert on this. And the last thing I'd say in higher ed, which I saw at Harvard, more and more of the students are becoming activists around demanding this kind of education. That the mechanistic approach, they're smart enough and know enough to say this is not sufficient. I need more dimensionality in what I'm being taught, because the world I'm going into will demand that dimensionality.
No, I think you're right. I know that in the work the three of us have been involved with, terms like solutionaries and actionists are terms that we use and don't use them lightly, because obviously for the young people that it's our responsibility to try and frame the learning for. We are also the generation that's given them some immense and very complex problems to try and work their way through. And I think, you know, you mentioned the binary nature around aspects of the system as it is, and another aspect of the binary nature I know in the work that Teresa and I have been involved with, for example, with SC21 and Amala, and having those discussions with external agencies, whether it's tertiary, largely tertiary rather than industry. But as soon as you start to unpack, you know, at SC21, we have what we call literacies. So we have transdisciplinary literacies and dynamic literacies. As soon as you try to unpack those and say, look, what we're trying to do is to create a learning environment where we're trying to balance the traditions around knowledge and skills in specific disciplinary areas, albeit in SC21 with a transdisciplinary lens, so that students can see the connections between thinking models they use in disciplinary areas. But you try and balance that alongside some of these durable dynamic skills. It's amazing how many of the conversations immediately default to, so is this a vocational program or an academic program? And of course, what we're really saying is, well, what the world needs now, alongside love, is basically to balance those two things together.
Yeah, I think it's a false dichotomy. It's like, okay, wait. Like, preparation for the future, whatever the form it takes, that's the responsibility of everybody in the human development system. Like, what else is there? And so forcing this vocations thing as a separate thing and not our responsibility, that's not the way it actually is. And I think that's what we have to get our heads around, is a better understanding the truth of what it means to be human in a world like today, and how we have to prepare humans for a world like today.
And in these complex times, how to have a sense of purpose, meaningful purpose, and how to flourish. I think those are really two fundamental areas that as educators, we've got a responsibility to try and create the learning environments and where those can be nurtured and explored, and to maintain creativity and curiosity.